I was at a tech networking mixer last week. One of those events where the air is thick with desperation and lukewarm white wine. I was standing near the back when I spotted him. Let's call him the founder. He was wearing a suit that was trying way too hard. Pinstripes, just a little too bold. A pocket square that matched perfectly, too perfectly. He had cornered a guy in a hoodie who I happened to know was a fairly major investor. The founder was putting on a performance that was physically exhausting just to watch. He wasn't just talking, he was broadcasting. They were wild, rehearsed hand gestures, and he kept dropping buzzwords like disruptive synergy and paradigm shift. With this intense, wide-eyed gravity, you could practically see the sweat beading on his upper lip. He was laughing too loud at things that weren't jokes, leaning in too close, desperate to force a connection. It was like watching a bad actor in a play nobody bought tickets for. But the guy in the hoodie, he barely moved. He just stood there, slouching slightly, looking completely bored and effortless. He didn't need to raise his voice or flash a watch because he actually possessed the status the other guy was frantically trying to simulate. Standing there, watching this interaction, I didn't feel superior. I felt this physical wave of nausea. My shoulders tensed up, and I actually had to look away because the secondhand embarrassment was so sharp, it felt like I was the one failing. It wasn't just annoying, it was visceral pain. It got me thinking, why does seeing someone try this hard trigger such a violent physical rejection in us? Why does that specific kind of effort feel like a violation of some invisible law? It turns out that feeling isn't just judgment. It's a biological alarm system against a very specific type of fraud.
That feeling, that visceral physical reaction you're describing, the cringe, that's exactly what we're diving into. It's precisely what some researchers are now calling the immune system of the collective.
The immune system of the collective. That sounds dramatic.
It is, but it's also incredibly accurate. The core hypothesis here, which sort of ties together evolutionary psychology, social dynamics, even what we see on social media, is that cringe is an adaptive psychological immunoreaction. It is designed, quite literally, to alert us to a specific kind of social fraud.
The cheap signaling strategy.
The cheap signaling strategy. It means we're biologically wired to detect the signal forger.
So the intense urge I had to either sprint out of the room or, hide under a table wasn't just me being socially awkward. It was my ancient brain running a security scan.
And screaming, "Warning! Counterfeit status detected."
Quarantining threat?
Yeah.
That's exactly what it felt like. A quarantine.
And that's the mission for this deep dive. We really need to understand why our cognitive machinery punishes visible effort and desperation so severely. We're going to explore how these deep evolutionary imperatives, the need for reliable partners, accurate status assessment, secure mate choice, how they manifest in everything from a Renaissance courtier trying to look graceful to a modern influencer just desperate for likes.
We're going to unpack why our brain goes to such lengths to quarantine the threat when someone tries to buy high-value social rewards, respect, status, with what are essentially flimsy, low-cost tokens.
Yeah, that's the core of it, the counterfeit currency.
But wait, before we get into the big framework, I have to ask this. The founder, my guy at the mixer, he was putting in a ton of emotional and physical energy. I was exhausted just watching him. Wasn't that effort itself a cost?
That's a great question.
Why doesn't the brain count his frantic energy as a costly signal? Isn't effort, even painful, awkward effort, supposed to be a good thing?
And that is the central paradox we have to resolve today. The answer lies completely within this framework of costly signaling theory. And what we're going to see is that the cost has to be incurred in the right place and for the right reason to actually be believable.
Okay, so let's unpack that with the scientific framework. We're talking about costly signaling theory. And this starts, like you said, with a really fundamental, ancient problem for any social species: deception.
Deception is the Achilles heel of any complex social system. Think about it. The incentives for almost any organism are structured so that they benefit from altering others' perceptions to their own advantage.
You want to look stronger, healthier, richer?
More genetically robust than you actually are. Of course you do. But this universal drive creates a huge risk for the person receiving the signal. If you, the receiver, trust a false signal, let's say you pick a mate who only pretends to be healthy, you could suffer immediate fitness consequences.
You waste resources, you choose a bad partner, you get into a bad alliance.
It's catastrophic, evolutionarily speaking. So you can see the pressure. Natural selection can't just, stop organisms from lying. It's not possible.
So instead, it has to select for better and better lie detectors. It's a constant evolutionary arms race. For every advantage gained by deception, there's an immediate counterpressure to develop better anti-manipulation adaptations.
Precisely, and the pressure is just immense. As a signal receiver, you only benefit from paying attention to a signal if you can verify that the information is honest and, crucially, relevant to solving your fundamental fitness-related problems.
If signals are cheap, they're useless.
They're worse than useless, they're noise, they're dangerous. So this is the absolute cornerstone of CST. The reliability of any signal has to come directly from its cost.
Okay, so let's define that relationship really clearly. How does costly signaling theory actually guarantee that a signal is honest?
The theory dictates that the signal has to be inherently costly, but in a way that creates a differential advantage. The cost has to be comparatively cheaper for those who actually possess the underlying quality being advertised, whether that's strength or resources or skill, compared to those who lack it.
It's like an economic barrier to entry for fraudsters.
That's the perfect metaphor. If a low-quality individual tries to fake that signal, the cost to them is so prohibitively high, maybe it's a huge expenditure or an extreme likelihood of failure or even injury, that it ensures the signal, on average, tends to not be worth faking.
So the high-quality person can absorb the costs, and for them, it's just a small percentage of their total reserves. But for the low-quality individual trying to fake it, bankrupts them.
It bankrupts them, exactly. And this principle is often visualized through the handicap principle.
Right. The idea that a costly display is literally a burden that only the absolute fittest can survive carrying.
Precisely. Ahmad Zahavi's handicap principle is all about this. The classic example is the peacock's tail. It's this beautiful, massive burden. It's metabolically expensive to grow and maintain. It makes the bird a super visible target for predators.
It's basically a giant eat me sign.
It is. And so only the most genetically fit males can afford to survive and thrive despite carrying that costly burden. And by doing so, they send an honest, completely unfakeable signal of their superior genetic quality. If a weak or sickly peacock tried to grow a tail that large, it would probably just collapse from nutrient deficiency or get eaten immediately.
Okay, so let's pull this into the human social sphere.
Yeah.
Our signals are, a bit more complex than just feathers. They're about reputation and skills. How do we humans incur costs to signal beneficial qualities?
We can start with a really ancient one, hunting and risk-taking. This is a powerful ancestral signal. Human behavioral ecologists look at this through what they call the show-off hypothesis.
The show-off hypothesis.
Yeah. They observe that in many small-scale societies, hunting really difficult, large, or risky prey often results in a pretty inefficient calorie return compared to just, say, simple foraging or trapping.
So if your only goal was to get the most food for the least effort, you wouldn't do it.
You would never do it. You'd trap small animals. So the point isn't just the meat. The point is the reputation and the risk you incurred to get it.
Ah, okay.
The cost incurred, the time investment, the required skill, the sheer physical danger involved in hunting something that could kill you is what validates the signal. For a poor hunter, attempting to take down large prey is highly likely to end in injury or failure or just a huge waste of critical resources.
So that deterrence, the high chance of failure, acts as the quality filter.
It's the filter. A successful hunter honestly signals strength, profound skill, the ability to plan ahead, and maybe most importantly, the ability to absorb or buffer failure. These traits dramatically increase their status, both among their allies and, of course, with potential mates. The signal is costly because the attempt itself is so dangerous.
I can almost picture the ancestral cringe response. Some young guy comes back from a hunt, telling a dramatic story about a near miss on a huge buffalo, but his friends notice he just has a couple of broken spears and, well, zero meat.
Exactly. The performance, the story is the low-cost token.
But the lack of success, the broken spears, that's the high-cost reality that exposes him as a forger.
That's a perfect analogy. Now let's shift to something that seems completely different, a highly cultural, seemingly non-essential behavior, art. Why is producing art so universally valued? From an evolutionary perspective, it's a bit of a puzzle.
Yeah, on the surface, painting a cave wall or carving a piece of ivory seems like a total luxury. It's time you're taking away from finding food or building a shelter.
But the time taken away is the cost. That's the whole point. Producing high-quality art requires a massive, non-trivial investment. We're talking years of time to master a skill, dedication of resources for materials that could have been used for something else, and the intense cognitive effort of creation.
So if you can afford to spend huge amounts of time crafting elaborate jewelry or composing complex music instead of just focusing on basic survival.
It signals a significant surplus. It signals high levels of health, access to secure resources, and crucially, the relative absence of debilitating cognitive or physical mutations that would prevent that kind of sustained, complex effort.
It's a signal that basically says, my life is so stable and my health is so robust that I can afford to waste all these resources making pretty non-essential things.
And that signal is incredibly effective. If you look at cross-cultural research on mate preferences, this is confirmed over and over. Traits like being creative and artistic consistently rank very high among desirable partner characteristics across dozens of diverse societies.
It's not just a modern quirk.
Not at all. And if you think about ancient public art like huge, elaborate murals or massive carvings, these often require defense against rivals or maintenance over generations. The ability to defend and maintain the art just increases the overall cost, making the signal of social power and formidability even more reliable.
That brings us to another fascinating area. The purely physiological signals, things like voice pitch and facial masculinity. These aren't intentional performances, but they still fall under this costly signaling framework.
They absolutely do. They are honest indicators of biological quality because of the developmental role of testosterone. High testosterone, which drives traits like a masculine facial structure and a low voice pitch, can be costly to the body.
How so?
Well, it can mediate against immune function or create long-term health trade-offs. So only high-quality males in excellent physical condition can afford to invest heavily in these secondary phenotypic qualities because for them, the relative cost of that investment is lower. The trait itself is hardwired. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to fake over time.
And you mentioned there's a fascinating behavioral nuance to voice pitch, right? It's not just the biology of the vocal cords.
No, it's the ability to maintain the signal under pressure. A low voice pitch also signals formidability because it requires the ability to maintain low levels of autonomic nervous system arousal.
When you're cool.
Literally. When a person is stressed or anxious or panicking, in a classic fight-or-flight response, their sympathetic nervous system activation naturally increases muscle tension and heart rate, which tends to raise their vocal pitch.
Their voice gets higher?
It gets higher, it gets tighter. So maintaining a calm, low voice pitch in a stressful or high-stakes social situation signals genuine confidence, competence, and a lack of internal panic. It's something that's very, very difficult to bluff in the short term.
So the founder at the mixer, with his wide, frantic eyes and his forced, too loud laugh, he failed 2 tests at once. He was putting on a high-effort performance, which signaled low reserves.
And his visible anxiety signaled high arousal, which undermined any claim of formidability.
His entire being was just a cheap failing signal.
It was a total cascade of cheap signaling failures. And that brings us to the internal mechanism that registered all of those errors in your brain, the cheater detection module.
Right. And we have to remember that the brain isn't just using pure cold logic. Evolutionary psychology suggests that our reasoning contains what are called adaptive specializations. These are evolved procedures tailored to solve very specific recurrent problems from our ancestral past.
The brain is not a general-purpose computer running content-free formal logic. It's just not. It's a suite of specialized tools. And one of the most powerful and well-evidenced of these tools is the cognitive adaptation for spotting social defectors. This module isn't looking for just any logical mistake.
It's looking for a specific crime.
It is. It's precisely tailored to detect the violation of a social contract, or what we call a social exchange.
And what defines that violation? What triggers the alarm?
The module activates when it detects that an individual intentionally took a benefit without satisfying the requirement. So, for instance, someone uses the communal water source but refuses to help defend the village.
Or in a modern context, someone takes the reputation benefit of high status without having paid the resource cost to actually earn it.
That's the key. So when you were watching that founder and your body tensed up and you felt that wave of nausea, that physical cringe was the direct output of this detection module.
It's the immediate visceral rejection response.
Yes. The function of the cringe is to quarantine the threat to the group's informational integrity. Reliable social information, who is trustworthy, who is genuinely capable, who has real resources, is absolutely crucial for group survival and cooperation.
A signal forger, a tryhard, who's trying to get access without paying the toll, they pollute that information ecosystem.
They make cooperative decisions risky and unreliable. So the cringe acts as a swift, decentralized punishment, a kind of social repulsion that enforces the cost barrier and keeps the signals honest.
So if this module didn't exist, or if we just ignored the cringe, we would constantly be fooled by cheap signals. We'd make terrible decisions about who to cooperate with, who to mate with, who to trust. It's a mechanism to maintain the fidelity of the entire social marketplace.
That's it. It's a guardian of social reality.
Okay, now we get to the core of the Tryhard phenomenon. We've established that signals must be costly. But the Tryhard is clearly incurring a cost. I mean, emotional strain, social capital, time, anxiety. So why then does the attempt fail so badly? Why is visible effort a status liability?
This is where the Tryhard fundamentally miscalculates the signaling equation. They confuse their own internal effort, what they feel inside, with what is a socially validated cost, which is what others see and respect.
What's the difference?
When you possess truly vast resources or talent or underlying quality, the specific task at hand should require only a negligible expenditure of energy from your total reserve. The visible strain is the tell. It signals that your resources are nearly depleted.
This is where we get back to that Renaissance ideal, Sprezzatura.
Yes, Sprezzatura, the capacity for studied artful carelessness. It's the high-status cultural language for this deep evolutionary insight. It dictates that supreme competence, whether it's intellectual or social, must appear effortless.
So when the investor in the hoodie barely moves, or when a master surgeon performs a complex operation with what looks like total calm,
that effortlessness signals a massive untapped reserve. It suggests redundancy. The message being sent is, this task is so far beneath my total capacity that it requires no strain whatsoever.
And the opposite is the Tryhard. He's visibly pushing, say, 90% of his capacity just to accomplish a 10% result. And that strain is instantly interpreted by the social brain as a deficiency.
Exactly. Effort signals two very dangerous things in a social context: desperation and limited reserves. Desperation means they need the outcome, your investment, your approval to survive, which makes them a risky partner.
And limited reserves.
Limited reserves means they're operating near burnout and they're ill-equipped to handle even a minor unforeseen challenge. Why would you want to align yourself with someone who is already at their maximum capacity? The brain just defaults to punishing that visible strain because it predicts failure.
So if we could formalize that moment of social judgment, what is the cheater detection module actually flagging when it produces that physical cringe response?
It's performing an immediate, non-conscious valuation calculation. The cringe transaction alert is the output. You can write it out like a computer warning.
Okay, what would it say?
Alert. Subject is attempting to exchange low-cost behavioral tokens, affectation, pretense, rehearsed dialogue, excessive praise for high-value social rewards, respect, affiliation, mating access. Proposed exchange rate is fraudulent. Reject currency.
The founder's aggressive hand gestures, the perfectly matched pinstripes, the recycling of tired buzzwords, those were the low-cost behavioral tokens. They were cheap to produce.
Anyone with a YouTube tutorial and a borrowed suit could generate them. They require no verifiable underlying competence. He was attempting to cash those tokens in for the high-value reward of being taken seriously as an alpha founder.
And the emotional discomfort I felt is the brain's immediate and mandatory enforcement mechanism. It forces me, the observer, to reject the counterfeit currency.
And uphold the rules of the evolutionary marketplace, where genuine status has to be backed by a genuinely painful cost.
It's just incredible how that feeling, which we so often dismiss as just, social awkwardness, is actually the enforcement arm of millennia of hard-won evolutionary truths about social economics.
Let's apply this cost logic to a highly visible modern phenomenon: conspicuous consumption. This is all about signaling wealth and status through purchases that prioritize presentation over, say, economic efficiency. We're talking about the Veblen effect.
Right. Why would worthy individuals pay a massive premium for a luxury brand when a budget brand might be structurally identical? The price itself becomes the signal.
It does, but this is the counterintuitive part that you really have to think through. If someone is truly rich, why wouldn't they use their wealth to just buy more quantity of things or goods with objectively higher quality instead of just paying a massive price markup for an identical item?
Yeah, that seems more logical. More bang for your buck, even if you have a lot of bucks.
That is precisely the core analytical challenge that requires some pretty sophisticated economic models to resolve. If you could freely vary the quantity or the objective quality of a good, wealthy people should always choose to signal by consuming more or buying objectively better things, not simply paying a higher price for the same thing. Because in theory, if a cheaper item existed that looked just as good, everyone, rich and poor, would flock to the cheaper item.
And the expensive signal would fail. The price barrier wouldn't be necessary.
Exactly. So why does the $10,000 handbag exist when an identical $200 version is available? Why is paying that premium price necessary for the signal to work?
Okay, why?
Because the price premium is the only thing left that prevents the imitation by the low-wealth individual. Imagine two groups, the genuinely rich and the aspiring middle class. If the low-wealth group attempts to fake the signal by buying the luxury handbag, that massive price tag has to impose a genuine, difficult constraint on their future finances.
It has to hurt.
It has to hurt. The cost has to be high enough that for the forger, it creates hardship, maybe forcing them to cut back on rent or basic necessities. For the genuinely wealthy person, that $10,000 is merely an inconvenience, a rounding error.
In other words, the product itself is fixed. It's one handbag with one recognizable logo. Since the brand can't easily stop people from buying one, that's a fixed quantity, and they can't easily increase the objective quality beyond a certain point fixed quality, the only lever left to make the signal honest is the price tag itself.
That high price acts as a functional cost barrier. It ensures that only those who genuinely possess high wealth can afford to pay that premium price without incurring a devastating personal cost. The premium is the necessary deterrent. If that deterrent were removed, the signal would instantly become cheap currency, and the wealthy would have to invent a new, more expensive signal to differentiate themselves.
So the luxury brand is essentially selling an entrance ticket to the signaling arena, and the price of the ticket is set specifically to repel those who are financially bluffing. It's a very clean, cold economic application of CST. The signal must cost enough to hurt the cheater.
Precisely.
This concept of cost brings us to the inverse of the tryhard, the person who signals supreme status through the complete lack of effort, or what we can call indifference. Let's contrast Julian, the anxious Tryhard founder, with Sophie, the woman you described who was bored and ignored the billionaire at the gala.
This contrast is absolutely crucial for understanding the social economy of status. Julian's palpable anxiety, his wide eyes scanning the room, his effort to impress it all, signals a profound deficit. He needs the group's validation, the investor's attention, the affiliation, because he lacks internal security or resource reserves.
And the group picks up on that.
The group instinctively recognizes this neediness not as an opportunity, but as a potential liability. He's a potential drain on the group's collective social or emotional energy.
Neediness is a signal that says, I am unstable, and I will require resources from you.
Exactly. But Sophie, standing there looking faintly bored, ignoring a high-value social transaction, signals the complete opposite, surplus. She is communicating non-verbally, my resources are so abundant and my status is so internally secure that I can afford to let this interaction pass me by. She isn't performing high status, she is embodying high security.
And why is that signal so powerful? It seems like it's because ignoring a high-status person or a high-value social opportunity is itself a profoundly costly action.
That is the core insight of indifference as a signal. The cost of apathy is the cost of the opportunity forgone. If Sophie were genuinely low status, ignoring a major billionaire could lead to catastrophic consequences for her, missing out on funding, networking, crucial social entry. Only someone with genuine secure status or an abundant supply of alternative options can absorb that potential loss without flinching. Her indifference is an unfakeable handicap.
Let's delve deeper into this because it's so interesting. The most potent status signal isn't, look at what I have, but I can afford to not care about that. It's a signal of redundancy.
Think about it in terms of risk tolerance and time discounting. If you are desperate, you have a high discount rate, you are willing to sacrifice a lot now for a small gain immediately. You have to try hard.
You can't afford to wait.
You can't. But if you are secure, you have a low discount rate. You're confident the better opportunities will arrive later, and therefore you can comfortably wait, even if it means ignoring a high-value person who's standing right in front of you.
So the Tryhard Julian demonstrates a high discount rate by expending maximum effort for immediate, small social gains. Sophie demonstrates a low discount rate by casually dismissing a powerful potential ally.
Her indifference implies such a vast reservoir of options and internal security that any single social transaction or judgment by the tribe is trivial to her overall well-being. And this requires both internal resources, like self-esteem and mental stability, and external resources, like wealth and a powerful social network.
I think we've all felt that instinctual respect for someone who genuinely doesn't care what the group thinks. Even if, on the surface, we find their lack of effort a little annoying, that biological respect is rooted in the reliability of their costly signal.
And the cringe we feel toward the Julian archetype is our instinct imposing punishment on desperation. We are biologically wired to identify that low-status individual attempting to mimic high status without having paid the underlying resource cost necessary to achieve genuine, comfortable indifference. It is the brain identifying an economic bluff that threatens the group's hierarchy.
Okay, so we've established that the cheater detection module is a universal biological tool. But what specifically constitutes a fraudulent signal varies wildly from place to place. This is where culture acts as the local software, tuning the alarm system to local norms.
Exactly. The human mind possesses the innate capacity to spot fraud. But the rules of the exchange, what is high cost, what is low cost, what is a necessary requirement for a particular benefit, are entirely learned through culture. What screams high status in one society can scream fraudulent Tryhard in another.
And we saw this so vividly in the example of Marcus, the American expatriate, who was navigating that high-context corporate environment in Tokyo. He was doing everything he thought was right.
Marcus was operating on the assumption that effort equals competence, which is a rule that often applies in lower context, high-mobility Western cultures. He read the textbook on Japanese etiquette. He performed these exaggerated textbook manners.
Like what?
Precise, ceremonial, two-handed pouring of drinks, laughing way too loudly at the senior manager's jokes, reciting these formulaic phrases about loyalty and dedication at the izakaya. He was trying intensely to signal competence and belonging by maximizing his visible effort.
But his team responded with what's called itai behavior, which translates roughly to painful or cringeworthy. The collective mood just chilled. Why did his visible effort, his textbook performance function as a failed, cheap signal in that context?
Because in that specific high-context Japanese culture, the genuine high-cost signal is cultural fluency. It's the ability to read the air, or kuki wo yomu. True kuki wo yomu is an unfakeable skill.
Why unfakeable?
Because it requires years of deep immersion, seamless blending, and an intuitive understanding of incredibly subtle nonverbal cues. This process requires a massive time investment and cognitive load. That's the true cost.
So
his actions were loud, obvious, and required minimal genuine cultural absorption. He wasn't demonstrating internal fluency, he was demonstrating external simulation. The visibility of the effort was the entire problem. By trying so intensely to signal, I belong, his entire performance screamed, I'm an outsider who has read a list of rules and is now attempting to perform your norms without internalizing them.
So the collective immune response of itais wasn't just discomfort, it was a repulsion toward the performance itself. His counterfeit currency of textbook manners was threatening the group's authenticity.
Absolutely. The local software, in that context, prioritizes subtle, earned competence and harmony over loud, rehearsed affectation. Marcus attempted to short-circuit the long, costly process of true assimilation. The social penalty, the collective freezing, the repulsion is the distributed enforcement mechanism working to maintain the integrity of that local status system.
It's enforcing the rule.
Yeah.
To gain high-value group affiliation here, you have to pay the high cost of subtle, effortless fluency. You can't just memorize the lines.
You can't.
It makes you realize that cringe is not about judging the person, really, but judging the transaction. The moment the proposed exchange rate between the effort and the reward becomes visibly unbalanced, the alarm just goes off.
That's the trigger.
Okay, so we've established that our brains are ancient. They evolved in environments where production costs were high and verifiable. If you built a high-quality axe, you put in serious, verifiable effort. But the modern world, especially the digital environment, fundamentally disrupts this ancient calculus.
This is the absolute crux of the evolutionary mismatch. Our psychological mechanisms were perfected for the ancestral environment, where cognitive effort and physical output were tightly correlated. They are terribly suited for the modern world, where the cost of generating convincing signals is rapidly approaching zero.
And digital platforms, social media in particular, are just hyper-fertile ground for this kind of signal forgery. They allow the creation of the curated self, which thrives on these low-cost tokens.
The curated self is a collection of signals that are artificially inflated in a non-natural environment. I mean, consider the classic perfectly candid photo.
The one that took 50 takes, 3 hours of staging, and a sophisticated filter to get right.
Exactly. The cringe emerges when the observer's detection system successfully finds the seams of that performance. We detect the calculation, the hyperstrategic framing, the filter application. These are all signals where the underlying costs, a filter, a slight digital manipulation, a staged moment in a borrowed setting, is exceptionally low compared to the high-status signal being claimed.
The signal of effortless leisure or genuine wealth or constant happiness.
And the ubiquity of these tools has created a dangerous feedback loop. Since real costs are hard to verify online, everyone has to try harder and harder to signal. But the very act of trying hard online, these sets of hashtags, the optimized posting schedule, that becomes the tell. That triggers the cringe because it reveals the low underlying cost and the high underlying need.
It forces our detection modules into constant overdrive. The brain is desperately trying to find reliable, unfakeable signals in a sea of algorithmic fakery.
That's why we value raw, unscripted moments so much now. The blooper, the moment of genuine surprise, because those are the only signals that would attain a high cost in terms of loss of control and vulnerability.
This issue has been exponentially amplified by artificial intelligence. This is the modern horror story of Elias, the fintech visionary on LinkedIn. His written output, his insights, his eloquence, his profound analysis was the very definition of a high-cost signal.
Historically, yes. Eloquence and profound insight reliably indicated a massive biological investment, years of reading, synthesis, experience, and inherent intellectual capacity. For our ancestral brain, Elias's perfectly articulated visionary posts were the highest possible status signal. He was a genuine alpha.
But those high-status signals were generated instantly and at virtually zero cost by large language models.
The system worked perfectly online. The algorithm validated the signal. It promoted it widely. The audience paid Elias the high-value social rewards of respect and attention based on those cheap synthetic tokens.
The fraud was only exposed when the high-cost reality of biological presence was required. The live, unscripted panel discussion.
Right. There was no time for an LLM prompt. There's no edit button, no filter. Elias had to rely on his actual biological low-cost capacity.
And the resulting silence, the stuttering, the breakdown in spontaneous thought, it triggered a biological shock in the audience. That intense cringe and confusion wasn't just disappointment. It was the entire cheater detection module failing catastrophically and then violently attempting to recalibrate.
The mind realized the high-status alpha was a total fraud. It perfectly illustrates the evolutionary mismatch. Our psychological mechanisms cannot distinguish between eloquence generated by 20 years of study and eloquence generated by a text box. When technology removes the cost barrier entirely, our detection system is essentially rendered blind to the most potent intellectual signals. The signal generator, the LLM, broke the fundamental law of costly signaling.
The question then becomes, if all intellectual signals become cheap, what is the brain going to pivot to as the new, reliable, high-cost signal?
The brain is actively updating its threat definition as we speak. It will revert to signals that are still biologically expensive and unfakeable under pressure. Think about spontaneous, witty humor, genuine emotional stability, or unscripted, complex improvisation signals that require real-time cognitive power and cannot be cached or pre-written.
Things that are still anchored in the high cost of biological presence and real-time nervous system control.
Exactly. So if you're looking at a world flooded with cheap synthetic competence, the most valuable thing you can signal is genuine, non-synthetic, high-cost human presence.
The cringe we feel toward the failed AI visionary or the overly curated influencer is our collective brain undergoing this stressful recalibration. We're desperately trying to figure out what the new, verifiable cost must be to earn respect when filters, pretense, and synthetic text are free.
And so often that cost reverts back to the ancient truth. The unshakable security that permits effortless competence and ultimately indifference to the outcome. To really synthesize what we've discussed, the feeling of cringe is not a trivial social emotion. It's a highly specific distributed enforcement mechanism.
It's the guardian of the social credit system, and it's actively preventing individuals from short-circuiting the hard ancestral rules of status acquisition by trying to exchange cheap tokens for high-value social currency.
And this system, built over millennia and then tuned by culture, is now struggling to cope with these new environments like the digital space where cost and signal are radically decoupled.
But the mechanism remains simple. If the cost of the performance seems drastically higher than the underlying resource, the signal is suspect and the observer recoils.
The ultimate lesson gleaned from this cold, deconstructed view of the biological imperative to signal reliably is not a manual for manipulation, but a profound clarification of the only truly stable strategy in the game. Authenticity, stripped bare, is not a moral virtue. It is simply the only stable, cost-effective strategy in a world wired, biologically and culturally, to detect the counterfeit. The massive, ever-increasing cost required to maintain a forgery almost always outweighs its fleeting social benefits.